All right, welcome back to On Energy by NRG. Over the past 3 episodes, we've dug into the structural complexities of the power industry. And this is critical in how we think about powering the AI economy. This includes some historical context around how much load growth we've experienced and how prepared the industry is. And it also, in the last 2 episodes, we spoke about the stakeholder alignment, either lack thereof or things that we could do to get greater alignment. So when you think about the 4 groups that we talked about before, there's team government, team big tech, team power industry, and really the team consumer, the existing grid consumer. Today, again, joining me is Travis Kavulla, Senior Vice President. Gave you a promotion, Travis.
I'll take it.
Maybe you should be.
I mean,
yeah, maybe you should be.
Your boss.
Yes. Vice President, Regulatory Affairs for NRG. Travis was with us on the last 2 episodes, and he's our go-to guy when we really talk about both the strategy and then what's happening politically and regulatory around how we're going to power the AI economy. So one bit of news since the last time we talked is Texas Senate Bill 6 that was recently enacted and did provide some clarity as one of the kind of first pieces of evidence that shows some stakeholder alignment, or at least gives us some ground rules at a high level to start thinking about. And Travis, as you know, the Texas legislature, they meet every other year. And given that this was SB 6, it was a high priority. So at a high level, what does this mean, from a legislative perspective and from an industry perspective?
Yeah, well, I will say it's a big deal. We follow legislation all across the country, and this is one of the most robust pieces of legislation to try to fill what, in some sense, is a vacuum in the regulatory space in the era of these new large loads, the AI revolution. And it does a handful of things. As a kind of high-level summary, it requires that data centers put meaningful money down before utilities plan for and build their interconnections. It does a variety of things to ensure that data centers will actually lead to new power generation coming online to reduce stress on the grid. It requires them to pay their fair share of grid costs, which have really soared in recent years in the Texas market. And then it ensures that they're good grid citizens. It makes sure that they can go offline during power emergencies, can rely on the backup generation to help support the grid in those emergencies. In short, it's an attempt to make sure supply and demand ratchet up at the same time, and that this economic growth is going to be net positive, not just for the AI industry and for us, but for ordinary Texans.
Yeah, it feels like with most pieces of legislation that probably no one got exactly what they wanted, but the end result seemed, pretty positive and something that the industry and stakeholders could really align about. So talk to me a little bit about how this bill came about, and, is Texas unique here? Or are we seeing potentially, some of the ideas that got into this piece of legislation making their way into other states?
Definitely. So you're right. Texas is a state that's on the top 3, the top 5 list of states with big data center development prospects. And we're seeing extremely large projections of demand growth in the power sector here, really exceeding anything in history, even the post-Second World War boom that we saw. Naturally, when you have this kind of pace of development, questions are going to arise. Is our infrastructure up to snuff? How is our regulatory system set up to permit and accommodate this growth? Are ordinary consumers going to be in a situation, to quote Daniel Day-Lewis's character in There Will Be Blood, of data centers drinking their milkshake? And are they going to be left out of having supply when data centers contract for it? Or maybe this is irrational exuberance and we're getting over our skis and we risk making investments that aren't actually supported by a realistic pace of demand. So those are all kind of questions that SB 6 was either directly or indirectly answering. And Texas has a lot to offer to other states, though it is unique in one respect. It's a purely intrastate grid. And so basically all of the shots are called by Texas state government, the executive branch in the form of the governor and the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and then the legislative branch, the Texas Senate and House. Elsewhere, there's a split between what the state does and what the federal government does. But that said, the issues are sort of the same in the other places. It's just a question of whether it's the state or federal government calling the shots. What's unique about SB6 is it was able to answer those questions that would have to be answered by multiple different institutions in other states, all in one package.
Yeah, you're right, Travis. The unique nature of Texas and not really having a lot of federal oversight certainly provides a cleaner way of thinking about stakeholder alignment. Obviously, we're seeing evidence of that because just looking at the updated load forecast and the load interconnect queue that these type projects have to go through to get access to the grid. I think we added 28 gigs from June to July, or maybe May to June. So can you talk a little bit about what are the implications of this load growth on how, we think about the not just generation in general, but different types of generation, and some of the moving parts that go into that?
Yeah, this forecasting of demand is really important because those forecasts are the binding influence on what kind of grid we end up building, a grid that ends up being paid for by everyone, even if that demand doesn't show up. And then, of course, these forecasts should at least be suggestive of what the competitive market in generation, how we respond and build at our own risk as opposed to the grid costs. So yeah, there's 200 gigawatts of demand forecast in rough numbers by ERCOT presently. That represents, 2.5 times existing demand. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's clearly not going to happen because it can't. So we need to get real here. And Senate Bill 6 tries to do that by a few approaches. First, it imposes some high study fees before you get into the queue to begin with, requiring that you have site control, and you also have to disclose sort of how many free options you're taking on the grid. I mean, if there's a hyperscaler or other developer that really just needs one 1 gigawatt data center, but is putting in 5 different requests so that an eventual winner can be emerged, the law now requires that be information that's fed into the process so that those requests can be discounted. Then, more seriously, there's a strong financial security commitment that needs to be made before utilities go around procuring equipment and commencing construction of the interconnection facility to prevent stranded costs from occurring. The PUCT, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, is going to adopt a rule requiring a standard financial commitment process. That also is a good thing. That should streamline this process and hopefully make it more efficient. Whereas anyone who's followed this knows that we've heard about a bunch of delays from utilities, even just coming back with numbers to quote to this. So all this together should lead to a process where we on the generation side should be a little bit more sure, a little bit more confident about what is actually likely to happen in this space. There's still going to be uncertainty in it, of course. I mean, that's why we take the risk, and we're out there trying to make that work. But it should try to cabin that risk, whereas now I think there's a lot of uncertainty about the range of load forecasts.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. The bill is very comprehensive, and I do think it was well thought out. One thing that is different and interesting is the focus on on-site backup generation. In a classic data center setting, you would see obviously the data center being built, and they would have traditionally more like diesel backup generation. It was primarily there when the grid was completely down, and they would bring the data center back up off of diesel. In this new setting, in giving the size and complexity and an impact on the grid, backup generation made it, somewhat into the thought process here of how the bill came together. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with the kind of on-site backup generation? Not only is it much larger, but it's going to be the interaction and implication of it is different than kind of how we thought about it traditionally.
That's right. So the uptime requirements for these data centers require them to have, backup generation almost across the board. That backup generation in a typical configuration, like you say, is going to be very seldom used. This law requires an inventory of that backup generation to be taken, and also that it can be configured into operations into the ERCOT market when system conditions reach emergency conditions. Under the standard reliability protocols that govern all of the North American grids, there's sort of 3 levels of energy emergency alerts, 1, 2, and 3. After that second tier, and after ERCOT has exhausted nearly all of what we call ancillary services, which are really these reliability services that promote the operation of the grid, then that backup generation can be called into service in order to promote continuing service to the data center loads and to give the rest of the grid the assist with grid-connected resources. So it's all about ensuring really that these are good grid citizens and have some cover as well on the part of the data centers to have some legal cover that they can run what is likely to be, fossil fuel backup power generation when candidly that might not be their usual cup of tea.
Check out part 2 as we continue to explore the power players shaping the future of AI.